This is Idiot with a Library Card, a podcast by Bennett Donnelly. And today, I guess, is sort of a part two of the Satanic Verses. I covered like the first two chapters of it. I was going to do a midway point, but then realized the book is gets a little more complicated to explain once you get through it. So this one's not going to be so much about the book as about everything you find on the internet when you search the book, which is the controversy of the book, the Islamic reaction to the book, which was not, we'll say, the most positive. We can go with that. In some sections of the world, it was nasty. There was a fatwa on Salman Rushdie's head called by the Iranian government. Bookstores in London, Berkeley, and some parts of the east coast of the United States and Canada were firebombed. There were book burnings in the street of this book, which had to help sales, so, I've never gotten that. This book was condemned by many people. Salman Rushdie apologized for it in a way that wasn't really an apology. Now, for me, I say good for him. I don't think authors should apologize for their work. So that's what we're going to cover today, is the controversy that the Satanic Verses caused, specifically with the Muslim community. And there's some big things and some little things. So to start, Salman Rushdie is a pretty controversial author anyway. He's an Anglo-Indian. I don't know how they do it over there. If he was American, it would be an American Indian. An Indian American. American Indian, something else. So he'd be an Indian American, but he's British, so he's a Indian British person. So he's written numerous books. 15 is the count I have, with the short story anthologies included. He's a great writer. I don't know too many people who would argue with that. He weaves in humor into his books. There's a realism, yet a fantastic element to most of his books. Midnight Children is a masterpiece. It's a great book. It's his greatest book. I'll probably have to do a show on that. It is such a strong showing by a great author. But that's the thing, is his books have had controversy before the Satanic Verses, and it's controversies from the countries of his upbringing. India, in Midnight Children, he says some not nice things about Mahatma Gandhi's daughter, who takes over the government later on after Mahatma Gandhi, and it caused some controversy, and he wasn't very well liked in the Hindu Indian section. He's also said some not nice things about Pakistan and Islam in general. He's not a very pro-religious guy, so generally very religious people may find his books offensive. But he was also a liberal at the time, very big on self-determination. Ironically enough, he was a big supporter early on of the Iranian Revolution, the 1979 Iranian Revolution. He thought the Shah was bad, and I think most people now have come around to at least admit that the Shah was problematic and did some really terrible things, had many human rights violations on his scorecard. But Salman Rushdie was generally anti-Shah, pro-revolution to a point, but then the revolution became a very extremist religious movement, and I think he started to shrink away from it. He was against the war in Vietnam and generally does not like the American foreign policy, probably still doesn't like the American foreign policy. So he's definitely from the left in his viewpoints. He's not some right-wing anti-Muslim ideologue Christian. Like, he's not a Christian. It's not like he's coming at it from Islam's bad, Christianity's good. Not that I'd necessarily be offended by that, but he's not coming from that angle. So just sort of rounding it out, he's interesting. He probably falls into the anti-religious camp, where he thinks most religions are problematic for a number of reasons. But the controversy specifically with the Satanic Verses is a multitude for Islam. And it completely targets Islam in this specific book. Christianity, Judaism, not so much. But the controversy with Islam is many-folded. The first big one is the actual title of the book, which isn't a great start if your title is offensive to Muslims. You probably won't like the rest of the book. And there are two sides of this. There's the controversy, the reason why Muslims have a problem with the book, and their reaction to it. The having a problem with the book is understandable. I don't think many people are offended by that. There are Christians that have a problem with all sorts of books, and different sects. I mean, Harry Potter for a while was not liked in certain Christian circles. But besides the point. So I'm going to go over the issues and then the problematic reaction. The issues Islam has with the Satanic Verses. Number one is the title, and what spins off from that. The Satanic Verses is a controversy in Islam in which the Prophet Muhammad gets some messages from the angel Gabriel, and that's how the Quran was written. It's the Prophet Muhammad getting messages from the archangel Gabriel, and he writes them down. But there's this one section that some people believe was given to, that Muhammad was tricked into writing down, that was given to him not from the angel Gabriel, but from the devil pretending to be the angel Gabriel. And it's a very specific part of the Quran. It's, I believe, Surah 58. I'm not very good at the Quran numbering system or verses. I can read what's considered maybe the Satanic Verses. It makes very little sense to me, so I'll have to explain it, because I don't know many people other than Islamic folks that it would make sense to. The other thing is it's translated into English, and Arabic and English may not translate well. Generally speaking, the Quran is written in Arabic and is supposed to be read in Arabic. You should learn Arabic if you're a Muslim, is the general consensus. So the English translations aren't always the best. But let me read to you what the Satanic Verses, what the verse that's supposedly satanic is. So, written in the Quran. Now tell me about Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Mamat. The third one, another goddess. What? For you males, and for him, the females? That indeed is an unfair division. And if you thought, whoa, what the hell does that mean? You are in my camp, when I read it and went, what? But generally, what some people think is that it recognizes what used to be goddesses in their own right, kind of a polytheistic system that Islam took out in the Arab world. There were a lot of polytheistic beliefs and, that sort of world where people had their special gods. And Mecca was the center for worshiping a lot of these gods. And the Satanic Verses is a thought that Muhammad allowed the recognition of these gods as sort of a transition from monotheism to polytheism. He made it that these three goddesses were angels for Allah. And that's problematic. It sort of toes the line between monotheism and polytheism, and a strict religion like Islam does not allow room for more than one God. And all three of the Abrahamic religions recognize the first commandment, thou shalt have no other God but me. So it is a problematic verse if you read it that way. Now in the book, it is given that way in that he's tricked into this verse, and he wants it because it makes his life easier in the book. He's fighting against this very strong religious establishment. You know, they make fun of him. He doesn't have a lot of followers, but then when he recognizes these three goddesses as demigods or angels, it's a compromise, and it actually hurts the religion. And I think I'm going to talk later on about the book as a whole and how it does hurt his religious view, but he has to come back and say that he was tricked. It's problematic for Muslims because the Prophet Muhammad shouldn't be tricked by the devil, and if he's tricked by the devil, what else in the book could he have been tricked into writing? So that's the first controversy, and probably the main controversy is the book itself, and it has a scene where this happens, where he's given this information. He goes back to, the city is not Mecca. It's not called Mecca. Actually, the name of the city sort of falls into another issue with the book from the Muslim point of view. But the city is run by, and the story of the city, of what is supposed to be called, what is supposed to be Mecca, is super interesting, and it's this city that's made out of sand. It's whimsical. It's a whimsical view of Islam and the founding of it. Sort of has a magical fairy tale type view of it, which is interesting. I mean, it's not necessarily bashing Islam, and it has some nice things to say about Islam, but generally it is more whimsical than the Quran. The Quran is a realistic book, sort of like if you had the Bible, but you sort of stuck fairy tales into it, and this Mecca is this city that is built entirely of sand, that, you know, it's a penalty of death to drop water in it because the water would destroy the sand and the buildings would collapse. But you see, this first issue is that the powers that be want this god to be worshipped, and they sort of offer Muhammad this deal in which if he could just recognize these three gods, they would let him in because they like him and they know he's really powerful. So there's a certain compromising of Muhammad, and that's probably the biggest issue. Then there are some smaller issues. The Satanic Verses, that's the issue. That is the main issue, and probably what grew the ire of the Islamic world. Now there's some smaller issues that I guess at this point, if you're a Muslim reading this book or getting, and generally I find the second to be true. The first being, a Muslim reading this book would have a lot of things to be offended about. A Muslim getting a summary of the book from someone who is offended by the book, and that's probably a majority of the people who participated in the book burnings and the protests, are not people who sat down and read this 500-page book to, you know, because this Satanic Verses part is early on. But there's some other problems in these scenes. Now, they're sort of flashbacks. The two main characters one embodies an angel and one embodies either the devil or a demon. So the one who embodies an angel has when he falls asleep, he goes back in time, and the one place he goes back to is the meeting of Muhammad, and he sort of lives out both parts of the angel Gabriel and Muhammad is himself. So the minor controversies are kind of interesting too, but the major controversy, and I need to just push this so everyone understands, that it is that Muhammad received information, wrote it down into the Quran about these three goddesses / angels, and that this information was given to him from the devil. Now, the Islamic religion doesn't really recognize this stuff as that happening, but there's a lot of controversy, and there's a lot of subsequent texts about this about this Satanic Verses controversy. When I look up I like to watch a lot of YouTube videos to get some back information and get some ideas of what's going on, and look up these books if I'm going to do a show on them. And the Satanic Verses thing, when you type it in, there are all these videos about how it's true. There's two specific. There's this guy that does videos that are completely anti-Islamic. He's a Christian that points out all the bad things about Islam, and he goes into depth about what the Satanic Verses are and why they're real, and how much evidence there is for them. There's probably less evidence that he said. I don't want to rep his channel because I have some issues with it, and it seems I'm someone who is a take care of your house before you start pointing at someone else's house, and he just seems like a Christian minister that does not like Islam. Now, I'm fine with that, but to devote your whole YouTube channel to tearing apart Islam as a Christian minister is strange to me. I think you should be dedicating it to repping Christianity and not shaking your fist at Islam. But besides the point, so this Satanic Verses thing is probably what drew the ire of the Islamic world to start. Now, there's some small things, and these are interesting because you'll hear. I watched a lot of videos and read a lot of articles of why Islamic people had a problem with this book. And the second most cited thing is that there's a brothel in the town that's supposed to be Mecca. The town is called Jahala. It's Jahlia. The town of Jahala is supposed to be Mecca, and actually, the name of it is the word Jahalan or Jahalia is what is called the ignorance before Islam. Basically, the time before Muhammad, where the Arab people were ignorant of the one true God, is the gist of it. Some people have a problem with that, but actually, I think that's an interesting name for Mecca because the town it represents the Arab world before Islam comes, and it's made of sand. It's kind of weak, and there's some weak spots, and it's immoral. There's all these brothels and gambling, and these gods are secondary and just lead to bad behavior. What we'd consider bad behavior, what Islam would definitely consider bad behavior. So I've heard some people complain about that's one of the controversies, but I think that's a misreading of the book. I don't think it's saying Islam brought this ignorance, but that the ignorance was there before Islam. So I actually think it's an interesting name for the town that doesn't necessarily trash Islam, but it's just an idea that... And it's funny because the town goes from sand, and Muhammad gets excommunicated, the town, and this happens in the Quran, and he goes to Medea. They call it something else in the book. It's not really important. There might be meaning to it, but not to waste time with that if there is a controversy about that. But there is some controversy about the name of the town. When he leaves, the town goes from sand to stone, and it gets calcified, which is an interesting thought of what Islam did, because Islam uncalcifies it, breaks it up and turns it back into a town of sand. Now, the other problem, and a lot of people have, is there's a character that's a poet, and when Muhammad comes back, when he comes back to the town, he's now got an army, and he's going to take the town, and he's going to kill or at least get and do something bad to all his old enemies there. Now, there's two things that happen here that are controversial. There's one where one of his scribes and one of his early followers, he's early on in the book, he's one of the 4 followers, changes some little things about what Muhammad is telling him the angel Gabriel said, and Muhammad never notices these small changes. This is another controversy in Islam that some people say happened, but there are minor things, and you wonder if the message gets across, and maybe if God wanted it in, God convinced him to change it. So it's not that big of a deal, but it is. It's saying that parts of the Quran were just sort of written by man, and that's not acceptable to Islam. Although I didn't see that much as a controversy that people cited. It's a small part of the book, and I think you really have to catch it. The other part they had a huge problem with. So this guy runs to a poet, and the poet was an enemy of Muhammad when he was in town the first time, wrote a lot of nasty things about him. Now Muhammad's coming back, and this poet is convinced he's going to get Muhammad's going to get revenge on him. So he goes and hides in a brothel. And some interesting things happen in the brothel. It's an interesting side story. But ultimately, to help business, Muhammad has 12 wives. To help business, there are 12 prostitutes in this brothel. They all change their name to one of Muhammad's wives. There's some interesting issues that people have. And this is the second thing I heard most cited on these complaints from Muslims, was that there's a whorehouse where the names of Muhammad's wives are disgraced by these prostitutes. I actually think there's a different type of message there that is being missed. I guess on the surface, I understand the problem, and this is part of the issue with the angry reading of this book it received from Islam. Is I don't think that Salman Rushdie was saying that Muhammad's wives were whores or anything like that. What I think he's saying is that people like to prostitute out the sacred. They like to take the sacred and make it profane. And when these prostitutes change their names to Muhammad's wives, they become very popular. And it's that the men like this idea of taking the sacred and making it profane. And you see this a lot in movies and things like pornography, where something sacred or something innocent is turned into something dirty or sexual. Reading it if you're reading it directly and not really looking into it, if you're just reading a summary and writing down the sins against Islam, this would fall under it, but I think it misses the point. So these are the main controversies. There's a few other ones. I mentioned that Mecca was named Jahala, which is the time of ignorance before Muhammad, but I don't see how that's actually a controversy. I know Mecca's a sacred city to them, but it represents Mecca before Islam, so wouldn't that be naming it that would be the ignorance before the time of Muhammad? So I don't know what the issue is. I heard a few people raise that as an issue with the book. Then there's another dream, and it's a short one. There's a few other dreams. He mostly goes back to the life of Muhammad and certain aspects. Those two main ones. First, when Muhammad receives the quote-unquote Satanic Verses, and then when he comes back to the city and sort of centers in that brothel where the prostitutes take the name of Muhammad's wives. But there's two other dreams. He has one weird sort of vision where he goes back and talks to a king. I didn't quite get that one, but the second one's interesting in that he goes back and a girl with the same name as one of Muhammad's wives, actually his youngest one, which you hear come up with controversies when people talk bad about Muhammad because he took her as a bride at 7 and consummated the marriage when she was 10. Yuck. Yeah, but it was a different time. Not that I'm justifying that as morally correct. I actually think even back then it was morally questionable, but I think it's not quite as unusual as people make it out to be. Still yucky, still bad. I don't think this is something Jesus wouldn't do. So, but I see the people that bring this up a lot as sort of anti-Muhammad, and I get it. I understand it. It's not something that has translated well into modern times, but maybe back then in the Arab culture it wasn't that big of a deal. And that might say something about Arab culture and the problems with it, but sometimes religions do have to grow out of the culture they're in, and they can't blow everything up. This is the Bible slavery talk. Well, why is there slavery in the Bible if slavery is wrong? Well, the Bible has to come out of the culture it comes out of. And it couldn't be so radical as to not be listened to. But this last part I'll bring up, and this was a minor controversy. It's a short part of the book, but another vision Gabriel has is he goes back to this town in, I think, India. It's not really explained, but basically this girl who is looked at as a prophet, she doesn't wear clothes, but butterflies cover her up. Like she's sort of this magical prophet. She tells the whole town that God has told her that they have to go across the sea. They have to leave the town completely. They basically leave this one guy who can't believe that this is happening, and he has all sorts of issues. I don't want to go too much into it, as this is a long show already. But basically, she sends this whole town to a suicide. It's basically a suicide march that she gets this whole town to do, and she happens to have the same name as Muhammad's youngest wife, the 7-year-old. I could see the issues maybe. I don't know. I actually think this is definitely much more a comment on religion in general, in that it can cause people to do suicidal or crazy, irrational things. Some people bring that up as a controversy, but it's not a big one. The reaction of the Islamic community is probably the most problematic. The fact that Salman Rushdie was given a fatwa from the Iranian government that basically meant if you were to be a good Muslim, you'd see Salman Rushdie on the street and you'd murder him. That's beyond the pale. I think as a Christian, as a person who grew up in the United States, who grew up with values of free speech and nonviolent practice of one's religion, to me, to murder someone because they said something bad about your religion is insane. And to grow up in a culture where people say bad things about Christianity, about Judaism, about all the religions, about religions in general, to go after this person is nuts. To burn their book. Anytime I see someone burning a book, I'm just... Obviously, this podcast is about books, and I clearly have a love for books. When I hear someone's organizing a book burning, I tend to then want to go read that book. I become scared of the people that are burning books. It's a frightening thing to do. Bombing bookstores, not okay. So I understand Islamic folks. I'm a religious person, so I understand the gut reaction of Islamic people reading this book and being upset about it. I wouldn't take that away from them, and I wouldn't look at them like, oh, what do you, like, get over it. No, I see where the book is upsetting. I tried to actually put it in to a way how it would work in Christianity, and the religions, it actually sort of harps on the difference in the religions, in that their main character, Muhammad, is a guy. Like, he's just a guy. He's just a person. He's considered the greatest person that ever lived, but ultimately, he's just a person. And so there seems to be some wiggle room for him not to be perfect. Where the main guy in Christianity is Jesus, to the Christian is more than just a guy. He is God incarnate as human. So it's hard for me to put into, like, is Muhammad infallible? I don't know. His word should be, I guess. I guess to me it would be like writing a book about Jesus' children. That would probably get the same sort of ire where people would get upset about it. It would be an interesting book, though. What would it be like to be Jesus' child? Would it be wrong for Jesus to get married and have children? I don't know. It's heretical to say so, to say that happened, because it's clearly not in the Bible. But if you wrote a book about it, I actually would probably read it. I'd be interested, especially if you wrote it straight. If you wrote it like, because this is written like an angel is giving Muhammad the message, so it would be written like Jesus is still God's son, but he, to fit in with the times, gets married and has children, and what it would be like to be those children if they had some divinity in them and all that. But that would probably be the closest thing to where I think this book would offend. It would be the Christian version of this book. So that being said, Satanic Verses is a great book. If you're Muslim, you may be offended by some of it, but maybe not so offended as people have made it out to be. This is the other thing. I don't think the book is overly offensive to Islam, but it's a little offensive, and I get the emotional I sort of get the emotional reaction. I don't get all the anger, but I get boycotting it, especially the very religious Muslims. I just don't get the blowing up things. So, in conclusion, if you read a book and it makes you upset, record a podcast about it. Write a letter to the editor. Review it. Make a YouTube video. Don't kill anyone. Don't burn it. You know what? If you want to burn it, do it in your backyard. That's fine. You can even burn it. I'll grant you permission to burn the book. Don't kill anyone. Don't threaten to kill anyone. And don't blow up a bookstore. Because, that's where books are sold, and I love books. All right. Well, thanks for listening. And if you have any books that you'd like to burn, please let me know, so that I can read them. Because I love reading books that people want to burn.